Richard Langston was the kind of man who never blended into a crowd. At 61, he wore his wealth like a second skin, handmade Italian suits, a Rolex that gleamed even under moonlight, and a Jaguar parked in a private spot outside his downtown law firm. A powerful corporate attorney by trade, he had spent over 3 decades building his empire from courtroom victories and ruthless deals. His name opened doors in elite circles. Behind that polished smile, however, was a deeply insecure man, someone who feared aging more than death itself. Richard was married to Vanessa Langston, a respected art gallery owner known for her poise and her icy elegance. But Richard wanted more. He craved adoration, youth, and the thrill of forbidden desire. That's when he met Alina Cruz. Alina was 23, a fashion design student, full of ambition, charisma, and a past she rarely spoke of. Raised by a single mother in a modest part of town, she had learned early how to charm her way through the cracks of society. Alina dreamed of becoming a designer known for empowering women, but dreams cost money. That's where Richard came in. They met at a private fundraising event Vanessa was curating. Alina had been hired as an assistant for the event. She wore a red dress she'd sewn herself, bold, confident, irresistible. Richard noticed. Their arrangement started innocently. Dinners, shopping sprees, tuition help. But it grew into something deeper, or so Richard believed. He showered her with gifts. A penthouse lease, a luxury handbag collection, a monthly allowance bigger than most people's salaries. Alina played her part well, laughing at his jokes, kissing his forehead, whispering sweet nothings. But there was someone else. Someone closer to her age. Someone she truly loved. And Richard, the man who had everything, would eventually find out. Richard Langston had always known his marriage to Vanessa was a partnership, not a love story. From the outside, they looked regal. Him, the power attorney, her, the elegant curator. They were fixtures at art galas, charity balls, and private luncheons in country estates. But behind closed doors, their home was a cold museum. Conversations were limited to logistics. Intimacy had faded years ago. They hadn't shared a bed in almost a decade. Vanessa wasn't oblivious to his dalliances. She had her own secrets, quiet and well kept. But Richard's affair with Alina was different. It wasn't just physical, it was obsessive. Alina made Richard feel young again, admired, relevant. Something Vanessa hadn't done in years. With Alina, he wasn't just a man with money, he was needed. And that feeling was intoxicating. Alina Cruz was many things to many people. A promising fashion student. A bright smile in the classroom. A doting daughter who called her mother every Sunday. But to one person, she was simply, Lena. Javier Morales was everything Richard Langston wasn't, and everything Alina Cruz actually wanted. 25, lean, with soft brown eyes and a quiet strength. Javier had been Alina's boyfriend long before Richard ever entered the picture. He was an aspiring filmmaker, the kind who spent long nights editing in dim apartments, living off instant noodles and half-formed dreams. But he had something money couldn't buy: heart. They met at a student film festival. She was volunteering at the ticket booth. He was screening a short film he'd shot on a borrowed camera. Their chemistry was instant. Awkward smiles, shy compliments, and an exchanged number scribbled on the back of a coffee receipt. For Alina, Javier represented possibility. For Javier, Alina was a muse. Her presence made his vision clearer, his stories more vivid. They didn't have much. Shared Uber rides turned into long walks. Cheap takeout replaced candlelit dinners. But they had each other, and they had ambition. They talked about building an empire together, her fashion, his film, one day producing movies featuring her designs. It was naive, but it was theirs. Then came the bills, the missed rent, the tuition gap Alina couldn't cover. She told Javier she had a connection, an older man willing to help. At first, he laughed it off, thinking she was joking. But soon, the gifts arrived. The designer handbags, the new iPad, the penthouse. Javier didn't ask questions. Not at first. He didn't want to seem weak. But he knew. She tried to explain that it was only temporary. That it wasn't real. That she loved him, not Richard. And Javier believed her. Because he had to. His pride was already bleeding from every dollar she spent on them. Dinners, clothes, camera gear. Funded by another man's lust. Javier hated Richard without ever meeting him. He saw the man as a predator, a manipulator, someone who used his power to steal something pure. He never imagined Richard even knew he existed. But Richard would, soon, and that knowledge would be the first spark in a growing inferno. If you're gripped by this powerful story, take a moment to support our channel. Like this video, share it with others, drop a comment with your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe for crime stories told like never before. Your support helps us keep these stories alive. By day, Richard Langston lived the life of a high-powered attorney, decisive, commanding, and polished. He sat at the head of long mahogany conference tables, wielding words like weapons. His assistants revered him, clients trusted him, judges respected him. To the world, he was still the man in control. But by night, he was someone else entirely, softer, needier, starved for attention in a way that felt almost childlike. In Alina's penthouse, Richard shows his power like an old coat. Gone were the courtroom speeches and leather-bound law books. He'd sit on her couch in silk pajamas she bought him, sipping wine she chose, asking her about the trivialities of her day like a lovesick teenager. To Alina, this transformation was part endearing, part pitiful. She knew how to perform affection, a touch here, a long gaze there, enough to keep the illusion alive. She learned which compliments made his eyes light up, which gestures made him feel young again. But her mind was often elsewhere, on the designs she was sketching in her head, or the texts she couldn't wait to send Javier once Richard left. Richard, in turn, played his own part with careful precision. He maintained appearances with his wife Vanessa, attending gallery openings and charity galas with her on his arm. In public, they were the perfect couple. He praised her talents, toasted to their shared legacy, and held her hand just tightly enough for the cameras to catch. At home, however, they barely spoke. They occupied the same space like well-trained actors in a tired production. And Vanessa noticed. She noticed how he stayed out later. How his shirts sometimes smelled faintly of unfamiliar perfume. How his phone, once left carelessly on the kitchen counter, now never left his side. But Vanessa didn't ask questions. Not because she didn't care, but because she had long stopped expecting anything real from their marriage. She had her own secrets. Her own lovers. Her own carefully managed double life. Richard thought he was the puppet master. That he alone controlled the stage. What he didn't realize that he was standing in a room full of actors, each playing a role, each with their own script, and soon, the curtain would fall. And when it did, blood would stain the stage. But lately, that illusion began to crack. Alina's demeanor had changed, and not subtly. She used to light up when he walked into a room. Now she barely looked up from her phone. She'd once ask him about his day, his cases, his victories in court. Now she cut dinner short with vague excuses, citing fatigue or deadlines. It gnawed at him. One evening, he watched from his car as Alina left her building, supposedly too sick to meet for dinner, dressed not in pajamas or a hoodie, but in heels and a fitted coat. She got into an Uber. Alone, but she was smiling. That smile was for someone else. He didn't follow. Not yet. But a seed had been planted. Back at home, Vanessa noticed the tension in his shoulders, the way he poured his bourbon too fast, too often. She watched him from the doorway of his study one night as he scrolled through what she assumed were emails but were actually old photos of Alina. Vanessa didn't say a word. She simply walked away. Their silence was an agreement. Vanessa wouldn't ask, and Richard wouldn't explain. But this new shift, this growing suspicion about Alina, awakened something darker in Richard. His mind, sharp from years of courtroom strategy, turned analytical. He began to replay moments in his head. The calls she ignored, the missed rendezvous, the nights she didn't answer the door. Once, she showed up wearing a man's jacket, too big, definitely not hers. When he asked about it, she laughed and said, "Oh, it's my friend's." He left it at the studio. Richard smiled, but inside, something snapped. In his marriage, Richard had accepted the performance. With Alina, he wanted authenticity. But now he feared she was just another illusion, like Vanessa, like his reputation, like his carefully constructed life. And if there's one thing Richard Langston never tolerated, it was betrayal. Richard Langston was a man who prided himself on control, over his image, his firm, his marriage, and most certainly over Alina. But as the weeks passed, something began to gnaw at him. It started with little things. Missed calls. A vague excuse about a group project running late. The way Alina's eyes lingered too long on her phone when she thought he wasn't looking. A shadow had settled over their conversations. It was subtle, but to Richard, it felt like a fracture. One evening, during dinner at an upscale fusion restaurant, Richard leaned in and said, "You've seemed distracted lately." Alina smiled quickly, too quickly. "School's just intense this semester. I'm tired, that's all." But Richard watched her fingers fidget beneath the table. She wasn't tired, she was lying. Later that night, back in her penthouse, Alina excused herself to the bathroom. Richard sat on the edge of her bed, staring at her unlocked phone on the nightstand. For a man who had negotiated billion-dollar deals and outwitted prosecutors, the temptation was too much. He picked it up. There were no texts with anyone named Javier, but there was a string of money transfers through a third-party app. Same account. Frequent deposits. The note on one said simply, "For the garage." Another. "Rent covered." Richard's heart slowed. A garage? He didn't confront her that night. Instead, he lay awake beside her, eyes wide in the dark, connecting dots and silence. His mind looped with possibilities. Was she using him? Was she laughing behind his back? Was there someone else? For the first time in a long time, Richard didn't feel powerful. He felt played. And Richard Langston didn't take betrayal lightly. The next day Richard hires a private investigator. The investigator delivers photos. Alina kissing Javier. Richard is emotionally shattered. He realizes he's not her lover, he's her wallet. Anger simmers beneath the surface. He sends Alina a message. "You think I don't see? Be careful." She laughs it off. Javier says Richard's just jealous. Richard gives Alina one last gift, $10,000. But it comes with a hidden GPS tracker sewn inside a handbag. Javier and Alina take a weekend trip to a cabin, funded unknowingly by Richard. He watches every step of their journey. Richard drives up under the cover of night. He parks a mile away. His mind plays tapes of betrayal over and over. Through the cabin window, Richard sees them making love. It's the final straw. He grips the pistol he brought, just in case. There's a loud knock. Alina opens the door thinking it's a ranger. Richard stands there, cold and hollow-eyed. Richard storms in, gun raised. He confronts them, calls her a whore, and Javier a leech. They pled, panic, but it's too late. The first bullet hits Javier in the chest. The second, aimed at Alina's heart, grazes her neck as she turns. Richard sets the cabin on fire, hoping to make it look like an accident. He drives off into the darkness, breathing hard. The next morning, fire crews find the charred remains. But Javier's body shows a bullet wound. The fire is ruled suspicious. Back home, Vanessa notices Richard's erratic behavior and burned clothes. He lies, says he hit a deer on a business trip. Autopsy confirms both victims were shot. Police began their investigation by viewing cameras leading to the cabinet and notice a black Jaguar heading in the direction to the cabin. They ran the plates and realized that the vehicle was registered to Richard Langston, the most powerful attorney in town. SWAT surrounds Richard's gated mansion. He opens the door in a robe. Calmly says, "I've been expecting you." Richard pleads not guilty. His defense claims emotional breakdown and betrayal pushed him over the edge. The courtroom is packed. Media outlets dub it the sugar daddy slayings. Richard shows no emotion. Alina's grieving mother takes the stand. She reveals Alina's dreams of opening a design studio. The courtroom weeps. Richard has a full breakdown on the stand. Screams that, "She used me like an ATM." The judge remains unmoved. The jury deliberates for 6 hours. Verdict: guilty on 2 counts of first-degree murder. Life sentence without parole. Experts on true crime podcasts analyze the case. A web of manipulation, desperation, and emotional destruction. The case triggers nationwide conversations about sugar relationships, emotional power, and financial control. Richard adjusts to life behind bars. The reality of confinement sinks in as the steel doors echo shut behind him for the 1000th time. No penthouse, no wine, no Alina, only cold metal beds, tasteless food, and constant noise. His fellow inmates whisper about the sugar daddy murderer. Richard becomes a recluse, avoiding the yard, skipping meals, declining visits. He stares at the wall for hours, sometimes whispering her name like a broken record. A guard finds a sketch of her face carved into the cement above his bed, her eyes hollow, her smile fading. He sleeps beneath it, haunted every night. From prison, Richard's story attracts national attention. A major publisher approaches his legal team to negotiate a tell-all memoir. The proposal is salacious. Richard's version of love, betrayal, power, and murder. They promise a multi-million-dollar advance. Journalists salivate at the exclusives. But victims' rights groups protest fiercely. Demonstrations erupt outside the publishing house. Alina's parents call it a mockery of justice. The courts rule under the son of Sam law. Richard cannot profit from his crimes. The deal dies in court. The manuscript, half-written, rambling, narcissistic, is never released. His story remains locked behind bars, just like him. Among Alina's belongings, investigators find a nearly finished fashion sketch folded neatly in her journal. Titled, Freedom, it's a flowing white dress with broken chain patterns on the sleeves and red thread forming a heart over the chest. Her friends, devastated but determined, launch a tribute fashion show in her honor. Freedom opens the runway, worn by her closest friend. The lights dim, and a spotlight hits the design. The crowd rises to its feet, many in tears. It goes viral online, symbolizing not only Alina's dreams but the emotional prison she lived in. The design becomes an emblem of pain, beauty, and stolen potential. From his dimly lit cell, Richard writes a final letter to Vanessa. His handwriting is shaky, almost illegible in places. He apologizes, but not for the murders. He writes, "I'm sorry for lying to myself for decades." He admits he never truly loved anyone, not even her, only the idea of being needed, being adored. He confesses his obsession with youth, with control, with feeling alive. The letter is filled with philosophical rambling, scattered memories, and twisted justifications. Vanessa never replies. She reads it once and burns it. The letter is later archived by journalists as evidence of his unraveling mind. On the anniversary of the murders, Vanessa visits Alina's grave, not out of pity, but solidarity. She lays lilies, Alina's favorite, and bows her head. "You were a pawn like me," she whispers. "We both deserved better." She walks away slowly, heels crunching the gravel path. Meanwhile, in prison, Richard collapses from a massive stroke while returning from the infirmary. The guards call for help, but by the time medics arrive, he is unresponsive. As they wheel him away, a worn photo of Alina falls from his journal. It's stained, corners bent, but intact, a ghostly reminder of the life he ruined. The prison gates close behind him once again, this time forever. As the story closes and the grave dust settles, we're left with one haunting question. How far would you go to feel wanted? If this story moved you, if it made you reflect on love, power, betrayal, and the hidden costs of control, don't let it end here. Subscribe for more true crime stories told with depth and emotion. Like this video if the truth behind the headlines matters to you. Comment below. What do you think drove Richard to the edge? Was it love, or just obsession? Share this story with someone who believes secrets never stay buried. Every view, every voice, every share helps keep these stories alive, and reminds us that behind every headline is a human tragedy. Until next time, stay curious and stay careful.